Hello and welcome to Fiction Fans, a podcast where we read books and other words too. I'm Lily.
And I'm Sarah, and I am so delighted to welcome writer, editor, and podcaster Dr. Kat Day on to talk about Night Watch with us.
Hi there. Thank you very much for inviting me on. I'm very happy to be here.
We're happy to have you.
All right, I know we're itching to talk about this wonderful book, but I'm going to delay us a little bit and ask what's something great that happened recently.
Well, I was going to mention another podcast because I had another podcast episode out this week because I'm right in the middle of Codex. I don't know if people know Codex, but Codex is a writing group online. And right at the minute, it's Weekend Warrior, which is where you write flash fiction every week. So I'm right in the middle of that, which is on every January, and it's always chaotic. But a podcast episode came out on Wednesday about writing flash fiction. So that was that was fun to record, and it was fun to talk about. It's always nice to have something come out. So that was good. And I always enjoy this contest, although I do invariably find myself tearing my hair out at some point. I'm like, I've run out of words.
That's awesome.
And we will link to that episode in our show notes. So listener, if you want to go listen to that, you can easily.
Sarah, how about you?
My good thing is that out of the blue, a friend who had kind of dropped off the face of the earth about a year and a half ago reached out. And so it was really nice to get back in contact with him. So that's my good thing.
That's wonderful.
Oh, that's cool.
It's always nice to hear from someone when you weren't expecting it.
Yeah.
My good thing is that I got a new video game, although that happened quite a while ago, and I haven't had time to play it. So my actual good thing is that I finally had a few hours of downtime this morning and started this game.
Nice.
It's still in early access. It's called Fabledom. It's like a strategic city builder, but it's set in a fairy tale setting, which is interesting.
Oh.
I'm liking it so far. That was nice to just do something with no purpose for a little bit.
It has purpose. Playing games is important.
Exactly, right? Like giving yourself some downtime. Not every moment must be productive. Anyway, what's everyone drinking this afternoon/evening?
I am drinking tea. I am just leaning into the British stereotype. I am more of a coffee drinker, to be fair, but at night, it's late for me. It's 9 o'clock here. So yeah, I tend to drink tea because it's slightly less caffeinated.
Yes, absolutely. Sarah, you also look like you have tea.
I am also drinking tea, yes. It's gray and rainy out, so a perfect afternoon to sit in with a warm mug of tea.
Well, I experimented with making a shrub, so I'm drinking a raspberry vinegar bubbly water thing. It's really good. There's some flexibility with the word make. I did not actually make the vinegar. I just infused store-bought vinegar, but it's raspberry and delicious and tangy, and it's probably not the right weather for a tangy sweet cold drink, but oh well.
I make a plum shrub every year with my father's plums because he has 3 plum trees and they're very productive, and that's more plums than one person can eat, or even 2 people can eat. And I really like using it in salad dressing. So if you haven't tried it in salad dressing, you should try using your new shrub in that.
We'll see if it lasts long enough, and if not, I'll have to make more.
Fair enough.
Okay, and other than Night Watch, which we are about to discuss at great length, has anyone read anything good lately?
I am in the middle of A Marvelous Light by Freya Marquesi. I might be mispronouncing her name horribly, and if so, I apologize. It occurs to me I should have checked that before I started. Yeah, it's period, but it's fantasy, and it involves these 2 men, and one works for the government, and they both work for the government, but one kind of works for this magical branch of the government, and the other one sort of finds himself in that same branch sort of by accident. So it's all the kind of stuff that happened, and there's the kind of a romance going on between the 2 guys, and it's a really good book.
That sounds wonderful.
Yeah, I've heard really good things about it. I have it sitting on my shelf, but have not had the time to pick it up yet.
It took me a little bit to get into at the start. It refers to characters by lots of different names, which is a thing that you sometimes get with period books, because you've got characters who've got a title, so they're Lord something, but then they're also known by their surname, by their sort of acquaintances, and then their intimate friends call them by their first names. And so it just it takes you a little while of like, wait, is that the same person as that? It's like yeah. But what having got my head around all of that, then I was like, oh, this is it's really like the world building is fabulous. It's very richly detailed, and there's lots of really interesting stuff going on, and you can sort of feel this whole world sort of unfolding. I recommend, pick it up, give it a read.
It also has a very beautiful cover.
Yes, it does.
Sarah, have you had an abundance of free time you didn't tell me about?
I have not had an abundance of free time, so I haven't actually done much reading besides Night Watch.
Yes. Oh, I was so excited. So this is the first time I've read this book in a couple of years.
Since May 18th, 2021, because we had an episode on Night Watch come out on the 25th of May, 2022.
It was a couple of years. And so it's not one that I reread as often as you do, Sarah. So I think I will probably be coming into it a little bit fresher than both of you guys. So I know we all read different like formats. I read an ebook. I have the physical copy, of course, but you can't read that at 2 a.m. when you wake up for no reason. So I read it as an ebook. The formatting bothered me a little bit, but that's just kind of what you get with ebooks sometimes.
I read it as an ebook as well, even though I also have the physical copy. And I actually didn't have an issue with the formatting. I remember trying to read a Discworld novel as an ebook way back when. And that was before I think they had figured out how to properly do footnotes in ebooks. So you couldn't jump back and forth, and you can now. So it made it actually for very pleasant reading, I thought.
Yeah, that I remember that was a pain. It still occasionally is, not with Discworld books anymore because they appear to have fixed it, but occasionally you find it with other books where it's fine for the first chapter. Mind you, Discworld books don't usually have chapters, so maybe that makes it easier. But then the second chapter, sometimes the footnotes go back to the first chapter because they haven't got the numbering separated. So it's different. It restarts again at 1. So yeah, you end up having, every time you want to check a footnote, you have to leave a bookmark, otherwise you can't find your page, which just drives you slightly up the wall. It is a lot easier with a paper copy. But I read the audiobook.
Oh, how does the audiobook do footnotes?
Oh, they are all read by oh, good grief. You know, it's shocking that I can't remember his name.
Was it John Colshaw, like you were saying earlier?
No. All the footnotes are done by the same person in all the books, and Death is done by the same person in all the books. And Death is Peter See, I know his name, but I just can't say Sérénade. Him. I'm sorry. And the footnotes are by that's shocking. Bill Nye. There we go. Bill Nye. So Bill Nye does all the footnotes in all the books, and every time there's a footnote, there's just a little jingle jangle noise, and then Bill Nye reads the footnote. It's rather lovely. Yeah.
That's delightful.
Death turns up, because obviously Death is in every single book except for Snuff and We Free Men. Those are the 2 books without Death in. There's your pub fact quiz. Pub quiz fact. So yeah, so he's in all of the books. He just reads all the Death parts.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
My copy had the links to the footnotes done correctly, but they weren't numbered. They were all just asterisks. So I had to like remember where I was on the page of footnotes to figure out which one I was supposed to read in that moment. And that was a little frustrating.
It didn't direct you to the specific footnote?
It brought me to the page that had like all of them on it.
Oh.
But then I had to go, which one am I doing? No, I read that one already. Nope, that one's later. And that definitely broke my flow a little bit, which was too bad. But it was a cheap ebook. I did the Kobo like amazing sale where you could get all the Discworld ebooks.
There's a Humble Bundle deal going on right now. I think it'll be going on for another week or so after this podcast is released. Unfortunately, it's US only, but you can get 38 of the Discworld books for $18 or something. And it's a very good deal if you don't have a lot of the ebooks. Or even if you do have a lot of the ebooks, it's still a good deal.
I mean, the deal was fantastic. It's worth it for a little bit of footnote frustration, but definitely, if you're interested, think of that before buying them, or at least on this bundle. Good book, though. That's kind of redundant. Everyone knows this is a good book. Do I even have to say that out loud?
It's very true. Kat, before we continue on, I do have a question for you. How did you get into Discworld?
I started right at the beginning. My mum turned up one day with copies of The Colour of Magic and The Light Fantastic. And she had picked them up just because of the covers, because of the Josh Kirby covers. And she just thought, well, they look fun. So she handed them over and I read them and loved them. And then I read The Dark Side of the Moon in Strata. And then I read Equal Rights. And then I just read everything in publication order after that, just literally as it came out. So my bookshelf, which I love my bookshelf. It just literally has every single book. They're a completely random collection because some are paperbacks, some are hardbacks. All the art is all different because it's just the art that was on the cover at that time. So they're all just sort of sitting there in there. It's sort of like this bit of 20-year history just sort of stretched out on my shelf. So yeah, that's it. I've been there I was there. I was there at the beginning.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. What about you?
I don't know. I don't remember why I picked up Discworld. I'm sure that I had gone into the bookstore one day looking for a book, read the back of Color of Magic, thought it sounded interesting, and never looked back. I'm pretty sure that I came to them when I was about like 11 or 12, somewhere in that range. I've been reading them for a long time at this point.
Yeah, I think maybe, I must have been about the same age. Maybe I was like 13 or something. But yeah, about the same.
Well, Sarah recommended them to me at some point. I started Color of Magic, bounced off of it very hard, and then made the mistake of asking Sarah not which book should I read first. No, I asked her, what's your favorite Discworld book? To which she answered Night Watch. So Night Watch is actually the first book of Discworld that I read in entirety.
I'm curious about this. Did it make sense?
Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah.
But I do think that I led you astray in terms of where to start.
I mean, I didn't ask you the right question.
That's true too.
But yeah, Color of Magic just didn't work for young me. I don't know. But I was determined to give this series a shot. Obviously, I'm glad I did. But yeah, Night Watch. Good book. Weird place to start.
Yeah. I think at the time when Colour of Magic came out, there was actually quite a lot of fantasy around at that time that was like that.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of two slightly oddball characters bounce around the world and do stuff, it was quite contemporary. It didn't feel particularly off the wall, really. Although he was obviously parodying, but he wasn't the only person doing that. There was like Tom Holt and Piers. The only surname I can bring to my mind is Brosnan, and that's not who I mean. Anthony. One is Anthony, and there was a lot of that sort of stuff around. See, this is why I will always, if you say, what is your favourite book, if that question is coming up, this is why I always say Equal Rights. It's not because I think it's the best book. Objectively, it probably isn't the best book. But what it was the book that really just took all of those fantasy tropes and just went, no, let's just throw all that out the window and we'll focus in on these two female characters, which was pretty uncommon at the time. We'll just center the entire story around two female characters and we'll let the world sort of unfold from them rather than here is a big giant fantasy world and I've put some characters in it. That kind of I'm gonna start with these two characters and it's going to be very character driven and we'll just see what they do. And they were female characters. And in 2023, that doesn't seem terribly radical.
Yeah.
Back in 1990, no, wait, it's 1980 something, isn't it?
I think it is.
Yeah, 1986, 7. I should know this. Anyway.
87.
You mean you don't know the publication date of every Discworld novel off the top of your head?
You're getting kicked off the podcast.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, anyway, back in 1987, it wasn't a thing that was terribly common. I hesitate to say it didn't exist because I just know someone will immediately message me and go, well, your problem is that you haven't read da, 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 da. I mean, and actually now I think about it, Ursula Le Guin did that a little bit.
But she was also a female author, so it's like, of course ladies are writing lady stuff.
Yeah. At the time, it felt very different and radical and like, oh, this is cool. Okay. And then, obviously, you get sucked in, don't you? The first one is free and then you just can't give it up after that.
Yep.
All right. So this is in the City Watch series of Discworld. Yeah, I probably should have looked up which number it was, but I didn't. Maybe 5-ish? Someone might correct me. I don't care too much how accurate that is. 6.
I did look it up. It's the 6th.
All right, thank you. I was actually closer than I thought I would be.
It's the 29th novel and the 6th Vimes novel.
Awesome. Now, Sarah, you have both the US and the UK edition of this book.
I do. And I was looking, like I said, I read the ebook, but I got out both of my physical copies because I wanted to check some little vocabulary changes to see if they changed between the two editions. And they do. And I think it's very silly that they remove an E from whiskey and add an E to gray and
We'll argue about that later.
We can talk about that later, but that led to me looking at the description on the back of the book of the US copy. And it says, one moment Sir Sam Vimes is in his old patrolman form, chasing a sweet-talking psychopath across the rooftops of Ankh-Morpork. The next, he's lying naked in the street, having been sent back 30 years courtesy of a group of time-manipulating monks who won't leave well enough alone. And like, no. That's not actually what happens. I mean, it's kind of what happens, but it was just so not accurate that I was like, how did this actually get on the back of this book?
Mm-hmm.
But this was the first time that I realized how explicitly the events of Thief of Time affect Vimes, because I had not necessarily picked up on that before.
Yeah, this is 2 books after Thief of Time, I think. And we know that Terry Pratchett often wrote several books at once, was always writing several books at once. So it's almost certainly the case that there was a bit of overlap between. They came out around similar time. So the lightning strike in here is the kind of the ending, isn't it, of Thief of Time?
Yeah, and I think this is chronologically, this is the next book in the like quote unquote adult Discworld novels, because in between Thief of Time and Night Watch, we have The Last Hero and Morris. Yeah.
Well done, you pronounced it correctly. Thank you.
My inclination is to say Maurice, so I have to think about it every time.
You know what tripped me up this time was Lord Winder, because in my head it has always been Lord Winder. And of course I realise there's absolutely no way to tell, is there? My brain read it as Winder the first time I ever came across it. And then I'm like, oh, I've been reading that wrong for 20 years. Okay.
I don't do that with Winder, but the midwife, I always call her Content, but it's probably Content.
Yeah, yes, because it's miscontent.
Yes.
Like, as in discontent.
Yes.
You see, she's discontented. Yeah, it's a pun on.
I like that. But every time I see her name, intellectually, I know that I'm mispronouncing it, but I just want to read it as Content. Mrs. Content.
I mean, he did all this sort of thing all the time just to annoy people. So, no, just because it amused him. But like, yeah, it's not surprising, really.
I don't think I ever landed on Winder versus Winder. I'm pretty sure every time it came up, it sounded differently in my mind. Nice and chaotic.
Yeah, Winder always felt right to me because he's this fairly unpleasant character. So the idea of him kind of winding things up worked for me. And then, but yeah, I think apparently, I haven't heard the Stephen Briggs audiobook, but apparently he said Winder as well. So I'm just going to have to accept that I was wrong. Sorry, it's not as good. Winder was better.
I've always pronounced it Winder in my head, so it's vindication.
Well, I incorrectly thought that this book was the first time we actually had a gnome character. We hear about gnomes quite a bit in Discworld, and then we see the gnome Watchman doing some watchmaning during the events of this novel. But Sarah corrected me, and in fact, there are other gnomes who clearly did not impress upon my memory at all.
Well, Buggy Swires is the gnome watchman, and he shows up in Jingo.
Oh, so same guy.
Yeah, I don't actually remember him in Jingo, but the internet tells me that he did show up there. And there's also a gnome named Swires in The Light Fantastic, who may or may not be Buggy Swires. So this is definitely not the first time we've had a gnome named character.
I feel like, I want to say Unseen Academicals, there's talk of a gnome. And I think at that point, Pratchett was quite keen to make a distinction between gnome and pixie, because he'd done all the We Free Men, and Buggy Swires is essentially a Feagle, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's certainly more of a Fiegel character than anything else. And so I think there would perhaps early on he was kind of categorized in that gnome category, and then later on he kind of went away. Oh, hang on, I can't do that anymore because he's clearly not. So
There's definitely an evolution there.
And the Discworld is always evolving, especially in those early books.
Well, yeah. And then he had this whole thing with Thief of Time and here, where he's just basically gone, and anyway, all of history changed.
Don't worry about it. It's fine.
If you were thinking of writing a letter, don't worry about it. It's just because the history monks were buggering about with stuff. So there we go. Everything is different anyway.
Which I kind of love. Like, what a great way of making sure that it doesn't matter if your continuity is off.
Yeah.
Who cares?
Yeah.
Every series more than 4 books needs history monks.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, there are some time travelers. They're just messing around with stuff. What can I tell you?
It just, it happens.
Gets you out of every possible trouble that you could be in.
Well, one of the troubles that this book introduces is that Vimes meets his younger self. And I obviously that's not the first time this has ever happened in literature, but I really loved the way that the narration of this book made it very clear that Vimes was the older version and Sam was the younger version. That wasn't consistent in dialogue, which makes sense, but the narration was always like very precise about that, and it made it very easy to understand, and I appreciated it very much.
Every time I read this, I'm impressed by how not confusing it is, because it could have been horrendous. And I mean, obviously, editors will have helped, but I also think that's just peak Terry Pratchett, isn't it? To just keep on top of that and never let the dialogue get confusing when it could be an absolute nightmare. They're literally talking to each other.
Yeah.
Through whole scenes. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of God level of authoring, isn't it, really, to keep that straight and to keep all the time travel stuff straight.
Yeah, and it was just like such an elegant solution. He didn't have to spend a lot of time explaining that. That's how it was. And it was very easy to pick up and just go.
Yeah. Oh, the other thing we should say, having mentioned Josh Kirby, is this was the first book that did not have a Josh Kirby cover, because Josh Kirby died just before this book came out. So this was the first book to have Paul Kidby's artwork on the front. But Paul Kidby painted Josh Kirby into the artwork on the original hardback. So he's sort of in there at the back of the picture.
I always feel that our US reading experience kind of missed out, because none of the paperbacks that I ever read that were US versions or the hardcovers had that art on it.
Well, Kirby or Kidby?
Either.
Neither. It's borderline clip art, I'm gonna be honest.
Yeah, it is borderline clip art.
It's not good.
Yeah, so I don't think that art ever made its way over to the US in the mass market paperbacks, which is a shame because they're both really talented artists and their covers are lovely.
Yeah, that's a shame. Yeah, I mean, the Kirby artwork is, for all that it wasn't exactly accurate, famously did not accurately depict the characters in any way, shape or form. It was iconic. It was just iconic. And we used to talk about Kirby covers. Oh, this book has a Kirby cover. Okay, it'll be good. I mean, you literally did judge books by their cover if they had Kirby on the cover for a while there. So I remember Terry Pratchett saying a tribute to Josh Kirby after Josh died, and kind of saying he just wrote Discworld and Josh Kirby made it, kind of thing. I'm misquoting horribly, but it was something along those lines. There was, that I do think the fact that he had those covers, it certainly in the UK went a long way to making Discworld so famous and so well known.
Absolutely. Pratchett also worked a lot of really fun, not extraneous, but additional information into his novels. Something that you had pointed out was the food taster spy mold, the toad-eating man.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm a chemist. I have a PhD in chemistry, and I also taught chemistry for a long time. And so I would read these books, and in every single book, there would be a little chemistry bit, or pretty much in every book, there'd be a little chemistry bit, which I always felt like Terry Pratchett was putting in there just to please me and the other chemists. Yeah, and here it's spy mold. Spy mold is the food taster. And there's a couple of things. It's rumoured that if he breathed on the cutlery, it would turn black. I started thinking about that. I'm like, well, Terry Pratchett hasn't made that up. Like, where is he going with that? And I think that he's alluding to arsenic poisoning, because if you consume, because the point about the food taster is he consumes poisons all the time and is therefore immune to all the poisons. And I think what he's referencing there is that the idea that if you take arsenic, you get garlicky breath due to the production of arsine gas on your breath. And I think if you react that with silver, it'll go black, or you'll get a black precipitate of silver. So I think that might have been what he was saying there. And then the other bit is the marzipan smells of almonds.
Yeah.
So that's definitely a chemistry reference, because cyanide smells of bitter almonds, or it does to perhaps not to everybody. It's one of those things that maybe not everyone smells it the same way, but it's famous for having that almondy smell. And I remember a chemistry teacher, and he was always very fond to sort of trot out. He said, right, if you're outside a chemistry lab and you smell almonds, it's either almonds, probably unlikely, or it's benzaldehyde, which is fairly harmless, or it's hydrogen cyanide. Send someone else in first.
Yeah. Very practical advice.
Yeah.
So I did not understand the 4478 reference. Is that...
You know what? I've flagged that up just because I am so curious about this. I would love to know the answer to this. I've seen it discussed a few times and it's never been answered. It's the combination on the safe in the watch house. And it's been that combination we're told it's been that combination for years. And it's that combination in the past, and it's still that combination in the future. And I just think that it looks so much like a date, right? 4478, 4th of April 78. It looks like a date, right? It's not Rhiannon Pratchett's birthday, because her birthday's in December, but it's that age. I just really love to know.
Yeah.
I wondered if it was something to do with Follett, just to bring Follett in, because in this book, Ken Follett won an auction, charity auction, to have a character named after him in a Discworld book. And so hence we've got Dr. Follett as the head of the Assassin's Guild. And it's not his birthday, he's older than that, but I wondered if maybe it's one of his children or something like that. Like, and that's why it's in there. But I'd love to know if anyone out there knows. 4th of April, 1978. Who is that? Come on, tell us. It feels like it can't be an accident. It's not an accident. Surely it's not.
And the number is on the page too much.
Yeah. And 25th of May is not an accident. 25th of May was Rob Wilkins' Paul Weller's birthday, out of wanting to put Paul Weller's birthday in there. So it's like, yeah, I'm sure it's not an accident. Yeah. What is like, why spell out that number? Must be something. I'd love to know. I hope we can find out.
You know, I don't think I've ever wondered about that, but I'm going to be wondering about that for the rest of my life now.
Apparently, the winner of Miss World 1996 was born on that day.
Oh, well, maybe that was it.
Question answered.
Maybe she was a big Discworld fan.
Maybe.
And yeah.
And the number one song at the time was Matchstick Men and Matchstick Cats and Dogs. That's all. That's what the internet shared with me. I don't think they were relevant at all, though.
If that seems quite obscure link, but who knows?
Pratchett does love his foreshadowing, though. There are some really excellent lines. Well, there's excellent lines in every Discworld book.
I'm pretty sure this whole novel is actually just one excellent line after another. To be frank.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned this when we were chatting at the start, but my Kindle version, I am not exaggerating even slightly, it has 200 annotations, because every time I pick up this book, I highlight more sections. There are more sections of this book highlighted than not highlighted. I swear. Yes, it's a masterclass, this book.
I think my favorite was near the beginning, Vimes says, "It's gonna be a long day." And of course, for him, the day ends up lasting like a week or something.
Yeah.
Poor guy.
I know.
But this particular quote that you pulled out is more foreshadowing for the actual planet, and less for the book a little bit as well. But our mum says there's going to be trouble soon.
Yeah, yes. So this is young Sam Vimes talking about politics and changes because we have a change of political leader in this book. And it is, you kind of get into that thing where the people, in inverted commas, are just talking, oh, it'll all be okay once we get rid of the guy in charge and put a different guy in charge. And you just think, it was obviously felt relevant at the time. But now it feels even more relevant. Like, yes, it's exactly the same thing, and it's that whole kind of don't put your trust in revolutions, they always come around again. And it's just that, isn't it? It's always like people always hope that it's going to be better. It'll be better when the new guy gets voted in, and it rarely is.
Old boss, same as the new boss. Or new
That's
boss, same
right,
as the
yeah.
old boss.
It works both ways.
It works both ways, yeah.
Either way, that's right. Yeah, and it's kind of young Sam Vine's kind of going, well, our mum says it's all going to be okay. And you're like, oh.
We wish.
Both UK and America are obviously facing elections this year. Have I got that right? I mean, we will probably have a general election in autumn or winter, I would have thought. So we're both kind of facing the same. It's all the same I mean, you read Night Watch and you think it's all the same conversations. People are saying all the same. Oh my God. It's like literally, he's absolutely right. It just comes around again. It's just all the same. I mean, it's just such a politically relevant book.
Well, and I think that's one of the things that strikes me about Night Watch, but also about many of the Discworld books in general, is how relevant they remain, decades after they were written. Sadly, how relevant they remain sometimes. But yeah, Night Watch in particular, it does seem like those conversations, they're still happening.
Yeah, I mean, not every book got every single thing right. I mean, I'm sure we could all pull out bits that maybe have aged better than others, but
we certainly have.
Yeah, amazing how some of it is just so. And I think, but I think the thing is, it's Terry Pratchett understood people. He obviously was a journalist and had spent his time kind of listening to people and studying people essentially, and understanding how people thought and think. And it's like, yeah, it just doesn't change, does it? It's always the same.
Yeah.
It's a slightly different problem, but it's the same behavior again and again and again. That's why it ages as well as it does, because it's like, well, people will always be people.
Yes, absolutely. Before we get into the spoiler conversation, usually when we talk about a Discworld novel, we ask the question, when should someone read this book in their Discworld journey? Don't do what I did, probably. It's a good book. It still made sense, but you get a lot more of Sam Vime's character arc if you read more of the City Watch books before this one.
I think that you would appreciate his internal struggle between wanting to make the world better and wanting to get back to his family more in this novel if you have read the other Vimes books and actually know a little bit more about who Vimes is. So I'm sorry that this was the first book that you read based on my recommendation.
It did the job.
It's true.
I do think if you couldn't make time to read all of them, and frankly, what are you doing? But what are you doing that's so important? Stop. If you could, I do think it's probably best if you read Guards at least.
Yes.
Because there is this kind of long character arc for Sam Vimes, and we'll probably get to this in a bit, won't we? But I do feel that there's a point at the end of this book where you feel like Sam Vimes' character arc has not exactly come to an end, but come to a point where he's done a journey, for want of a better word, from where he starts as this broken down alcoholic, to where he is in this book, and where he ends up at the end of this book, and the decisions that he makes at the end of this book. So I think you probably don't need to read all of the Watch books for this to make sense, but I do think it'd be a good idea to read Guards rather than just jump into this, because otherwise I think you're going to miss that kind of nuance of what has happened to Sam.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. I mean, you should read all of the City Watch books just because they're all great, but
and then you get to meet Carrot, who is not in this book hardly at all, and that's a tragedy.
It's okay, actually.
I'm one of those people who has a few problems with Carrot. So I'm on the But anyway, let's not get into that.
Not actually relevant for this book, yeah.
Yeah, not really.
But I do think that if you only have limited reading time for Discworld books. Like if you could only read 4 or 5, which, as you say, Kat, what are you doing? What's more important than Discworld? But if you could only read a certain amount, I do think that Night Watch should be one of those, because it's a really thoughtful book. You know, one of my favorites. I read it every year. So I definitely think it's worth making the effort to get to Night Watch.
Yeah, it is. It's so masterfully put together. I mean, the plotting gives me a headache just thinking about it. I have just trying to make sense of it as a reader. As a writer, I'm like, I could never. I don't know how he did that. I mean, it's just every single beat is paced perfectly. Every character, there's an enormous cast of characters, massive cast of characters, and even allowing for the fact that you know some of them because you've read other Discworld books, it's an enormous cast of characters, including a whole load of new characters who are not really very much in other books, if at all. And yet somehow Pratchett does that thing that he does of making every single character completely distinct from every other character and instantly recognizable just by their speech patterns, which, I mean, just that alone, I think people don't appreciate how hard that is to do. And he's just like, oh yeah, they're fine. I mean, it's just, yeah. I mean, he really was a genius, and this is peak Terry Pratchett. So you're right. This should be in the kind of this one and Hogfather, and actually Thief of Time, because Thief of Time again and the twist at the end of Thief of Time is just amazing. Like literally a drop the book and stare at the wall for a bit moment. You know, they're the ones, aren't they, that you absolutely ought to have on your list somewhere, even if you can't make time for the other 40 books.
To avoid spoilers, skip to 1:11:50. So women, huh? Pratchett. He does his best. I would say this book has several fabulous female characters. And then poor Sybil.
This is where I want to talk about the new audiobook, because I had issues with the female voices.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So the narrator is John Coleshaw, who is, if people who are listening don't know who John Coleshaw is, he's an impressionist. He's pretty well known in the UK, but maybe not outside the UK. He's not really an actor. He's known for doing impressions, and he is extremely skilled at impressions, but he's more of a comedian and a kind of a sketch show person. And his female voices were not good. I'm sorry I said it. They're not. So we have Lady Messerole in this book, who is this exotic, mysterious woman, right? And when I read the book in my head, she's older, but she's not very old, right? You'd probably put her in her 40s, perhaps. This idea that she's very elegant and mysterious. She's meant to be from Genoa, which we know from other books is kind of more or less American deep south. So you would put her as maybe an American accent.
Makes sense.
At least a faint American accent, or I guess maybe something faintly sort of very Southern European. But no, John Coleshaw, for some reason, makes her sound like Lady Bracknell from The Importance of Being Earnest, right?
I don't know what she sounds like.
Okay, so you know that the very famous phrase is a handbag. You must have heard. You ever heard that? That's how she talks, though, all the way through.
Oh dear.
It's a very old, very white, upper class dowager voice. Dowager. I'm mispronouncing that word, but kind of thing. I can't do it now. Handbag. Handbag. It's like that, right? And that's how she talks. And it's so wrong, because she has this scene where she is clearly flirting with all the men and chatting all the men up, and she's talking like this, and it doesn't make any sense. It's just, I was like, oh no, that's just wrong. And then Rosie Palm, which I don't know, is that a joke that the Americans are likely to get? Is that
yeah, Miss Palmer, I think, is usually more often used in the American versions of that joke, but it's a very similar dirty joke play on words. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, she is supposed to be, in the book, she is this very streetwise, sharp, intelligent woman, right? Not posh, perhaps, but very, very on the ball, very smart. And the voice in the audiobook is very Well, frankly, it sounds quite a lot like Captain Jack Sparrow. She sounds like she's drunk the whole time. She's kind of slurring her words and talking. Yeah, I'm like, but no, Rosie doesn't talk like that.
Oh,
Right? No, she's smart and sharp, and it's just wrong. It just feels wrong. Yeah, and I'm just like, oh, why did you do that? Sandra Batty's voice is okay. That was, she's the needle woman. She's all right.
yeah.
But yeah, and I'm like, oh, there's really not very many female characters in this book. This whole book is a lot of male characters. You could have at least got the ones that are in it and are important and have big speaking parts. You could have given a bit more thought to what they are supposed to sound like.
Yeah, it makes them humorous characters when in the novel they're quite, competent and have like really important parts of the plot in a way that we don't always see with female characters in Pratchett books.
Yeah, and I mean, I think this book kind of, because of the nature of it, it was always going to be quite male dominated. Because, I mean, the Watch books are anyway, and then also you've gone back to a point in time when there weren't women in the Watch. So Pratchett couldn't just kind of throw a couple of female characters into the Watch House in the past. This was kind of the only way he could write in female characters. And they are really cool. Like Rosie Palm is a great character. She's very smart. Lady Messerol is a great character. And it's like, oh, this is a shame. This is a shame that they've not been served well. I want to say I'm complaining, but a lot of the voices are great. Sam Vines' voice is great. And of course, if you know John Coleshaw's work, you start to recognize voices. I made myself a little list, actually. You got young Downey sounds like Alan Rickman to me. which felt right because it was a bit Professor Snape, right? So that was that kind of sort of, he's a bit of an unpleasant character. Lord Winder is Lord Sugar, which I don't know if he's a known character. He's a businessman, but he hosts The Apprentice. Dr. Follett is David Attenborough, definitely. And I picked up a few others. I'm pretty sure I caught Johnny Vegas in there somewhere. And there was a Boris Johnson at one point for sure. One of the characters. Yeah, so it's like you could play a sort of a fun game of like, I recognize that voice. Yeah.
That's awesome. Sarah, you and I disagree on the treatment of Lady Sybil.
We do disagree on the treatment of Sybil in this novel in particular.
Yeah. To me, she is a sexy lamp, which is the idea that you could replace the character with a sexy lamp and it wouldn't change the book at all. Although in this case, I guess she's a pregnant lamp. But yeah, I don't think she even has a line. It's rough.
No, she does.
Does she have an entire line? One whole line?
Yeah. Well, she's young Sybil says a couple of things.
Yes.
But also at the end, she says, we're naming him Sam, no arguments, after the birth. So
yes.
She is kind of, in fairness, tied up. Not literally, but she's quite busy giving birth through this whole story, so I guess.
And that's why, I mean, I do agree to a certain extent that I agree we don't see a lot of her because she's pregnant. And
pregnant women aren't allowed in society.
No, I was gonna follow that up with so much of this takes place in the past. So obviously we don't see current Sybil. And yeah, maybe she could be replaced with a pregnant lamp and nothing would change much. But I don't think, with some of Pratchett's books up until now, you get the sense that the women aren't always fully rounded characters because he just didn't bother or didn't know how to make them fully rounded, didn't know how to make them present in the story. And I don't think that's the case here, which I think is where you and I disagree.
No, it's true. The plot makes it impossible for her to be involved in the story. I just think it's deeply ironic that at the end of, was it the Fifth Elephant? Yeah. It ends with Vimes. His big character moment is promising to try to be a better husband and they're going to spend more time together. Cut to next book, 0.
But he is desperately trying to get back to her the whole time.
There are several points in this book where he's like, oh no, in my list of priorities, I forgot about my wife until number 5.
Oh, there's only one. He does that once. Yeah. I hear what you're saying.
And yes, it is the plot of the book that did it, but it's still it's not a lot. It's not great.
But I actually think that one of the most revealing things about Vimes's character in this story is when he has his inner dialogue about how, as much as he loves his wife, as much as he wants to get back to her and get back home, if it meant leaving things when he could have changed them for the better, he would change things for the better, because that's just so important to him, is making the world or Ankh-Morpork a better place. So like I think that that's actually a really important struggle in this book, is his being torn between duty and his wife.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and there's the whole thing about the cigarette case.
Yeah.
You know, that he needs that connection to Sybil to keep going.
Yeah.
I hear what you're saying, but I feel like it was just necessary for this for this story at this time. I mean, he did do snuff after this, didn't he? When Sybil had a much bigger part to play.
It's true. It doesn't ruin the book for me. It's just recalling that, yeah, I'll be a better husband, and then very little husbanding actually happens.
He's there when she gives birth.
Not really.
Well, he's told to wait outside, but he is in the house waiting outside.
Yeah, he goes running across the town naked to get to her. I mean, you know, Ankh-Morpork as well, not the most friendly of places, and he literally runs across the city absolutely stark naked.
True, because he has to catch Carcer.
Well, no, because he's running to Sybil in that moment. He's
right, because he thinks Carcer's headed towards her because of the line where Carcer at the beginning says, "I can see your house from here."
Right, but he's worried about Sybil.
Oh, of course.
Yeah, he's trying to get to Sybil.
She's a very important pregnant lamp.
Okay.
Well, speaking of lamp metaphors, lamp shading. It's a much more fun one.
Yeah, I wanted to mention this just because I came across the term lampshading fairly recently, and I just thought it was interesting. Obviously I'm aware of the concept, which is that idea that in a book, if you are writing a story and you know that the logic of what you're writing doesn't really make sense, fit together, right? You can't get around it. There's no good way to get around it in the narrative. So what you do is you just sort of draw attention to it. And some character will say something like, "But that doesn't make sense." And you go, "I know, but we've got to move on." And of course, it's something that you see in books all the time. Like if you read fantasy and science fiction, it comes up all the time, right? I just not come across the term before, right? And I think it's just that thing of just, you feel critical of the author if they do that and they don't call themselves out. But if they call themselves out on it, you kind of, oh, right, fair enough. And Pratchett does it quite a lot, but I had not come across a word for it before. And I came across the word lampshading. And then, of course, I got to the bit where they're trying to explain the whole time business of getting Vimes back to the present. And Lucy says, "Oh, great journeys begin with a single step." And Q says, "That's not how it works at all." And as a reader, you're kind of going, "No, but that doesn't make any sense with all the things you've said previously either." Like, doesn't it? And then Lucy goes, "Yes, I know, but it's a useful lie." And you're like, there we go. That's it. He's just done his lovely little bit of lampshading there. He's just like, yeah, it doesn't make any sense. Never mind, let's go.
Yeah.
And I just spotted it there, and I was just like, oh, I see. Yeah, that's a perfect example. I'm just like calling it out in the dialogue, literally calling it out. It doesn't make any sense. No, I know.
It really does smooth over a lot, just like having an inconsistency be acknowledged.
Yes.
It's so much easier. Or not just inconsistencies too, but like maybe a character is written to be an asshole and having the text say, "Yeah, I know they're an asshole. That's on purpose." And it's like, okay, great. Excellent. I can move forward now.
Yeah, I think, as a reader, you just want someone to acknowledge the problem, don't you?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what it is. It's like, and as soon as somebody goes, yeah, okay. Then you're like, all right, fine, I don't have a problem with it anymore.
Yeah. All right. Earlier we were talking about how amazingly prescient a lot of the politics in this book are. I do have one, not quibble, but there was something that did not translate well to modern day United States, which is all of the conversation around weapon access. Different year, different place, very different vibes. Didn't work great just because of all the gun control issues we're having.
Yeah. I have seen that rolled out by a couple of people who are pro-gun, and that bit where Vimes, because Vimes talks about the fact that, banning weapons just means that the bad guys have weapons. The people to break the law have weapons, and the citizens don't have weapons, and how does that help? For sure, Terry Pratchett did not mean that to be applied to a real life situation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just hard to read a line that's verbatim used by gun nuts. Like, even I know it's in a different context. It's fine. Like, I can get over it. It's a book. It's okay. But it just make you go, oof.
Yeah. It does. It really does. It kind of, when I got to that, I kind of winced as well, because and he said, I do wonder if he would have written it, if he would write it now.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't. Probably when he wrote it, he just thought it was the sort of observation Sam Vimes would make.
Mm-hmm.
It's, great idea. Yeah, if we ban weapons, all that will happen is the bad guys have weapons. Mind you, having said that, I'm just trying to get my timings. I'm trying to think about the times. I think guns were banned in the UK. I want to say 1994. It was around then, because it was after the Dunblane massacre. There was a school shooting in the UK. And then after that, that's when we got the very tight gun control laws that we have now.
Very sensible.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this argument was made in argument against those gun laws, but the politics of the UK being different, we went the way we went. We still have the very strict gun laws that we have, and it didn't cause any of the problems that people threatened that it would, and probably the same case would be in America. But
yeah, it's a fantasy novel. It doesn't have to fit one for one to reality, but I do bring baggage as a reader to stories, and that's one of them.
Totally. I mean, it probably is the sort of thing Sam Vimes would think. I mean, I think it's tempting to hold Sam Vimes up as this hero. He is the hero of the story, but he's also not a nice guy in a lot of ways, right? I mean, there are like 3 or 4 times he just knocks people out.
Yeah. There's a lot of knocking people out that doesn't quite work with brain damage, but that's very easy to hand wave. It's fantasy book. It's okay.
Yeah, including his younger self at the end. It just knocks him on the head, and you just think that he's a guy who's on the streets. He's practical. He does what he has to do. It probably is what he would think, even though it doesn't sit well with the way things are now.
He also acknowledges that about himself. Let me see if I actually highlighted it. I'm not sure if I did, but there's a point. It might be in the fight at the end with Carcer in the graveyard, but there's a point where he comments that he and Carcer have basically the same ideology, in the sense that they will both do what they want, but the difference between them is that it's Vimes doing it.
Yeah.
When he does it. So there's that little acknowledgement too, that Vimes, as much as we love him, as much as he is the hero of the story, he's not necessarily a good person. He tries to be, and that makes a difference, but he doesn't get it right all the time.
No. I mean, I think this is a thing about Vimes, isn't it? The whole kind of key to him is that there's this whole inner beast, which is talked about here, but then obviously it becomes more explicit in Snuff. But the whole point is he knows he's a bit of an arsehole, but he's always watching himself, right? He knows that about himself, and he is always watching himself, and he is conscious of it. And that's why we like him, I think. That's why he's such a good central character, because he's got that layer of complication. Like, he's not a nice guy, but he knows he's not nice. And he is always watching himself and stopping himself. There is a moment in Snuff, I think, where detritus I'm pretty sure I'm thinking of Snuff. No, wait. I think it's Snuff, but I might have got it wrong. I'm happy to be corrected. But detritus calls him out at one point for talking about the trolls as though they're thick and stupid. There's kind of this whole inner thing with Vimes where he goes, oh my God, that is what I do. That is what I do. And you can, that the kind of the cogs are all going around in his head, and he's realizing how problematic that is in that moment and how he needs to cut it out. So yeah.
That sort of self-improvement is sort of a theme that we see through all of Vimes's books. His character is very consistent in that he's always trying to grow. We see that a lot with racism in some of the earlier novels, when the Watch starts accepting.
And speciesism, yeah.
Yeah, sorry. Species.
Well, racism too, but
yeah. He always wants to be better, which I think does really go a long way for letting him still be the hero despite having flaws.
Well, and And I think that that's what makes him a more interesting character than Carrot, for example. Like,
Mhm.
we don't have to talk about Carrot a lot. He's not in this book a lot. But like, Carrot is such a nice guy, and he doesn't have very many flaws. He's just consistently nice. Whereas I think Vimes is a lot more relatable because he makes mistakes. He's sometimes an asshole. He does his best, but that's not always enough. And that's just more compelling and relatable to me as a reader anyway.
But this is my, I mean, like you say, we don't need to go on a tangent about Carrot, but this is why I dislike Carrot. I mean, I like him as a character. He's an interesting character, right? But it should not be forgotten that at the end of the second Watch book, he just runs somebody through with his sword in cold blood who is not threatening him. And he does it because he knows Vimes won't do it, right? And as far as he's concerned, this person has to die. So he puts a sword through them. And you think, yeah, that is the problem with Carrot. He's a nice guy and he believes that he is right. And there's this kind of awareness that that's sort of why he shouldn't be in charge, because if he was, it would be, because he doesn't question himself, it would go bad very quickly. He's very black and white. He's very, this is the way things have to be. Whereas Vimes is much more kind of gets the greys of the world. And that's why I would much rather trust Vimes than Carrot, right? Because Carrot, you just sort of think Carrot could go wrong so easily. He's a bit of a psychopath, Carrot. Like a nice one. He's nice. He knows everyone. He's lovely. He's very charming and nice and lovely. But also he would just put a sword through you if he thought you'd done the wrong thing, right? Whereas Vimes would haul you off to at least have a trial first. I mean, I think, yeah, this is it. But that's again the brilliance of Terry Pratchett's writing. He was trying to contrast those two things. Carrot is the traditional hero, and by the way, traditional heroes are quite problematic. Vimes is a very non-traditional hero and full of flaws and all kinds of issues, but he's better because of that. And I think, this was a recurring theme with Terry Pratchett, wasn't it? It was like, everyone can be better. Everyone can learn. Everyone can do better. Everyone can look at their actions and kind of, can chat, and I think he was trying to contrast those two things. And it's not the only book where he does it as well. I see it a bit in Morris as well, with all the different kind of characters in Morris. Not to go off on a tangent there, but, you've got Morris and Dark Tan, not Darky Tan. Sorry. And what's the old rat called? It's gone out of my head. What's his name?
The leader, the original leader.
The old Luke. Yeah.
I don't remember his name, but I remember the character.
But I felt like with that, he was really, but and then again, when you think actually all these books are written around the same time, he was playing with these ideas of leadership and different kinds of leaders, and the importance of looking at yourself and looking at your actions and choosing the way forward, recognizing your flaws.
Ham and Pork.
That's it. Thank you. Ham and Pork.
Ham and Pork was the name, and that must have been where we got
the from.
Yeah, in Darktan. We're combining the two names.
So yeah, I think that's what he does. And you see him doing it with Vetinari as well. Like Vetinari is this very calculating character, but again in this book he's giving us an insight into Vetinari's character and how he got to where he was, and it's just about him being the absolute best he can possibly be, and even if that means not following the rules and not being cool, which is quite a nice message, right? Obviously he's an assassin. But it's that kind of thing. It's like it's more important to be good than to be cool.
I mean, I would argue that Vetinari is the epitome of cool regardless. I love Vetinari, but
he goes his own way.
He does, yeah.
And you see it here when he's hated and bullied by the other assassins. They don't like him because he's reading books and learning and practicing and doing, and they're all prancing around in their black clothes trying to be cool, and he's like destroying the only copies of the books on camouflage because he wants to be the only person that can do it.
There's a great importance, specifically in this book, but there's probably instances of it in all of the Vimes books, about having good judgment about knowing when to break the rules. And I think we see that in both Vimes and Vetinari, which is different from Carcer, right? Because he just breaks the rules all the time because he feels like it, versus are two examples of good leadership who show good judgment for when you should follow the rules, when you should maliciously follow the rules, and when you can break the rules.
Yeah, and he does that with Susan quite. I mean, in Hogfather as well with Susan,
yes.
and kind of like, I specifically told her not to follow me. It's like, yeah, yes, and I think Carcer here is that very Carcer is selfish and self-interested, and he just does what he wants to do, and he is the kind of the extension of that concept. Like, if someone literally didn't care about anybody, they just were only worried about themselves, you then eventually get to Carcer. You know, he's a much nastier villain than, you know, even Tea Time stroke Teatomy in Hogfather, because you don't see any kind of redemption in Carcer. He's just broken, you know. Well, he's not even broken. I mean, actually, maybe that's it. He's not broken.
Yeah. That's something. Doesn't Vimes say at some point it's horrifying how sane he is?
Yeah.
Like, you want him to be a madman, but he's not.
He's not. He's just, there's that bit at the beginning, isn't he? He's got two, you look into his eyes and he's got two demons and they're just urging each other on. He's just flat out evil. But also manage, you know, and this is that thing, isn't it, of how truly selfish, self-interested people can also sometimes be quite likable. You know, he does all right for himself, Carcer, doesn't he? Drops into this city that's sort of 20 years in the past and kind of ends up in a leadership role pretty quick.
There's the comment that Carcer is basically the Vimes but inverted. Like, he has all of Vimes's charisma and
manipulative skill.
Yeah, and characteristics, except that he uses them for bad ends, whereas Vimes, of course, uses them for the good of the city.
Yeah, but I mean, I think that's, Carcer doesn't question himself. He just does what he wants to do in the moment. Whereas Vimes, you know, who watches the Watchmen? Me. Still, you know, Vimes is constantly watching his own behavior, which is where I think it's why you need that kind of guards reference, because he is this reformed alcoholic, and it all kind of feeds into the fact that he knows that as soon as he can't have one drink because one drink is too many, you know, and it's the same. You can't murder one person because as soon as you've just, no matter how much how horrible they are and how much harm they've caused and how much damage they've done, as soon as you do that, you're on this slippery slope, and he knows where that leads and he cannot go there, you know, and so he's always watching himself.
And there's that lovely quote about bribery and how if you take a bribe, even if it's just $1, like, everything else is just haggling over price, which is that same kind of concept.
And then there's that quote much later on in the book, Kat, that you pulled out: when we break down, it all breaks down.
Yes. So when we break down, it all breaks down. That's just how it works. You can bend it and you can make it hot enough that you can bend it into a circle, but you can't break it. Because when you break it, it all breaks down until there's nothing unbroken. And so, yeah, that's it. That's the thing. You can bend the rules. But when you have that moment where you consciously choose to break the rules for your own ends, because it's what you want in that moment, that's when everything falls apart. And Sam Vimes will never do that. And that is why he's so awesome.
I have a sort of semi-related anecdote. Very, very tenuously semi-related. In this book, they use lilac as sort of the symbol of the small group of, not on purpose, revolutionaries, but Vimes' small group of people who he trusts that ends up fighting with him, and several of them dying over the course of this novel. I always shudder in horror hearing about them attaching sprigs of lilac to their person. Because, this is just me, my mother-in-law once gave us a bouquet of lilac out of her garden. It was very lovely and very sweet. We brought it home, put it on the counter, and then, teeming off of it, comes a cloud of tiny spiders. So we immediately put it outside, and no lilac for us. And I just have that mental image. So every time they're attaching lilac to themselves, I'm like, don't do it. It's not worth it.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't noticed a lot of spiders living on lilac, but it probably, because it grows around here all the time. May, actually, more at the beginning of May, but I'm not sure if that's global warming or just it was convenient for the storm. But anyway, it's like more hot, so the conditions are different. But yeah, because there's a bit in the book where they talk about on the battlefield putting carrots, having carrots, don't they?
And that's how they were identifying each other.
Yeah, but that is a reference to a battle where the Welsh side used leeks.
Mm.
Yeah. So that's like a real historical reference. And then it's kind of, yeah, okay, well, carrots, leeks, lilac. Of course, now here every year, everyone has the lilac on the 25th of May, which is nice.
I wish that I could grow lilac, but we don't get cold enough for it. It needs a frost to bloom. So California lilac is lovely, but not quite the same.
The bees like it.
And the spiders. Our lilac bushes, none of them are lilac. They're all white. They still smell great, but it is kind of funny to me, a non-lilac lilac.
I've realised randomly that the other book I was trying to remember was not Snuff, but Thud, just to save people writing in. I meant Thud.
There's another really wonderful character we meet in the back in time portion, which is the majority of this novel. Ned Coates, who sort of takes turns being an antagonist and a comrade for Vimes.
Yeah, Coates is interesting. Now, Coates was another character I had a bit of an issue with the voice. Not as much as I had with Lady Messerol and Rosie Palm. But now Ned Coates, to me, he seems like he's kind of special ops.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah. For want of a better way of putting it, I don't want to say spy, because that kind of gives him a level of cool that he doesn't quite have, but there are these multiple suggestions that he's very trained, he's very dangerous, he's a really nasty fighter, he knows more than he should, so there's that kind of underground feel to him. And in the audiobook, his accent is this kind of chirpy Geordie accent. I'm afraid sounds a bit like a character of a kids' TV show. It sounds a bit kind of Postman Pat, Fireman Sam. And I was like, no, that's not how Ned Coates talks. I kind of get it why it's been done, because you've got all these other rough and ready. If you tried to make him sound like yet another kind of Cockney rough voice, it would be impossible to tell them all apart, right? It's hard enough as it is. So he kind of had to have a distinctly different voice. So I sort of get it, but it's quite hard to take him seriously. But every time he starts talking, and I won't attempt to do an impression. I've embarrassed myself enough doing Lady Messerol's voice. It's kind of like, oh no.
Maybe it was an affectation to throw people off his trail.
Well, I mean, yeah, maybe. I mean, yes. It just doesn't quite feel right.
Yeah.
I did want to bring up Ned Coates because there's this thing. I know that there is a fan theory out there. I've heard about this, that Ned Coates is Sam Vines's son from the future back in time.
Interesting.
Yeah. So he's Sam Jr., right? But I just want to say, because there's a line that Ned Coates says. He says, coppers do what they're told by the men in charge, and it's always like that. Which is why I think he's not a copper, right? This is why I think he's undercover, right? Because he talks about coppers as though he isn't one. But I also don't think any son of Sam Vimes is ever going to say coppers do what they're told by the men in charge. Those are just not words that are coming out of any son of Sam Vimes' mouth, right? I just know. So I think just on the basis of that line alone, I think no. He's obviously something a bit interesting, but he's not. I don't think he's that. I think he's not tied up who or what Ned Coates is.
Well, but he also dies in the revolution. I mean, which granted, Keel dies, and obviously Vimes is still around because there's the hand wavy time stuff there. But like
corpse swapping.
Yeah, so that could in theory happen with Ned Coates too. But when Vimes visits the graveyard, like Coates's grave is one of the 7.
Yeah, we don't ever really find out who or what Ned Coates is, sadly. I wonder if Terry Pratchett meant to tie that up at some point and just lost track of it somewhere along the line. Yeah, it is a bit of an unanswered mystery who he is.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I always just kind of read him as he was one of the revolutionaries, one of the serious revolutionaries as compared to Reg. Yeah, Reg. But I guess there is a little bit of mystery there.
Yeah, because he's meant to have come from the same place as John Keel, right?
Yeah.
Because this is they're from the same, he knows John Keel, so that's how he knows that Vimes is not Keel.
Yeah, he was day watch instead of night watch.
Yeah. Swordfish, it's always swordfish.
Well, shall we end with a conversation about cigarettes?
Yeah. The very ending of this book delights me particularly. Mark Burroughs talks about this in his biography, in his Pratchett biography, talks about Terry Pratchett describing the final scenes of his novels as cigarettes, which he claimed he'd named after American cop shows where they would sit around smoking and explaining the plot to each other. And then this happened. Oh, and he did that because of this, and that sort of thing. Which to be fair, you also get at the end of any kind of classic British murder mystery, English murder mystery. They all sit around, although it's probably not cigarettes, it's cups of tea, but it's the same thing. Oh yeah, Poirot is kind of sitting there going, this is what and one story, particularly Poirot actually writes a letter that literally explains everything that's just happened. But yeah, so anyways, cigarettes are these kind of bits at the end where he ties up all the loose ends, explains all the little bits that needed explaining, and neatly sorts it all out. And I don't know when he was giving interviews and when he mentioned that. I don't know what the timing is, but I wonder if he was talking about it as he was writing this, because right at the end of this novel, Vimes literally throws his cigar into the garden of Inner City Tranquility, which is a great name, right? How good is that? And it becomes part of the plot. Like the cigar, everything moves in the garden around the cigar, and so the cigar becomes part of the plot. So he's literally taken that kind of metaphor of, I mean, it's not a cigarette because Vimes smokes cigars, but literally taken that metaphor and kind of built it into the story. And then it's like the last two lines of the book, and it's just like, oh, yeah. It's just lovely. Just that kind of that ending where he's like, yeah, he heard it land on the gravel, which moved, and then he went home.
It is a perfect little ending.
Yeah. It's brilliant. It's just it's brilliant. It just works on every level. It's just the perfect ending. It's not often that the final lines of a book stick in your mind, I don't think. I can't think of many books where that's the case. Like occasionally you'll remember the intro of books for reasons of them being famous. But can you think of any other books where you can remember
The Great Gatsby.
Okay, yeah.
But that's the only one I can think of.
It's not common, is it? That where this is one of those things where it's, Vimes throwing his cigar over the wall. It's just absolutely iconic. It's like, yeah, that was how you ought to have ended that, and that's how you ended it. Perfect.
More evidence of Terry Pratchett's just brilliance as an author.
Absolutely. Totally. Yeah. I mean, it's these books that are kind of in the middle from the sort of the early 2000s where you're just sort of going, oh, I think everyone should just give up now because no one will ever write a better book. We should all just stop trying.
And Sarah, you have a Words Are Weird for us today.
Yeah, I have a Words Are Weird. I don't know if it's so much as words are weird versus porting books over from the UK to the US can sometimes be weird. I was reading my ebook, which of course is a US ebook, and it uses whiskey with an E and gray with an A. And I just wondered whether or not my UK copy had changed it. And it did. It has whiskey without the E and gray with the E. And I just, I get that sometimes we have different vocabulary, like language evolves and our two Englishes have changed in subtle ways. But sometimes something is so tiny, what's the point in changing whiskey, the spelling of whiskey and gray?
That's funny because whiskey, we have both spellings here.
Yeah, both spellings are right. Sarah's just crazy about it.
No. It's not that.
Yeah, I wonder why they did that, because whiskey with an E is Irish whiskey and whiskey without an E is Scotch whiskey,
right, that was what I was going to say. It's different kinds of whiskey. It's not that I'm crazy about it. I just drink a lot of Scotch whiskey.
You correct me when I'm talking about bourbon.
No, I just like the spelling without the E better.
Yeah, so it's not about accuracy. Don't pretend.
It's not always about accuracy.
I mean, I imagine it was just an editor being an editor, probably, wasn't it?
Yeah, I just think it's silly.
If it's such a small thing, then why does it bother you so much?
Because it's silly.
You have to make the decision, okay, we are changing this from British English into American English. And if you start trying to quibble over what level of edit makes sense, that just gets so overcomplicated instead of just saying, yes, we're changing the language from British English into American English.
I don't know.
It's so much simpler that way.
I mean, I think for me, like if the word means something different, yeah, change it. If it doesn't mean, if it's just a matter of spelling, isn't that so much more effort?
For my day job, I have to edit both British and American documents. So I am quite aware of the quirks. I mean, there are all kinds of odd little things like double L's in traveling. I tell you something that if I tell you this, you will not be able to unsee it. You probably never noticed. The British English versions of the Discworld novels, Pratchett uses single quotes for dialogue. And in the American books, it's double quotes. And that's one of those things once you, and I mean, that is convention. British English tends to use single quotes for dialogue. Not all authors follow that. Some authors will use double quotes anyway, but it just kind of depends what habit you picked up. But once you've seen that, you can't unsee it. It's like, and that's how I just instantly can tell you whether it's an American book or an British book, because it'll have double quotes if it's American and single quotes. Yeah, there's other things like, signaling has one L in American English, and obviously color. And
I was going to say the color of magic is in the the American English version.
Is it spelled, without the U?
Yeah. I don't know. I could see an argument for why change it at all. Let people like experience different versions of the language. But trying to argue that they should only change it halfway is nuts to me.
Yeah, it's weird. Another word that comes up for me occasionally is mold. And in British English, regardless of whether you mean fairy stuff on cheese or something that you pour something into to make a model, it is spelled with a U. And in American English, it is just spelled MOLD. And I remember getting into an argument with it about a document that was meant for an American audience, and they still wanted the U. They wanted everything else. American English, but that one word they were determined would be spelled. But why?
Yeah, I think that requires much more justification.
Yeah, why that word? Mm-hmm. But for whatever reason, it mattered, so it had to be done.
Oh, I think inconsistency would stand out so much more and bother me so much. And then I'd be paying attention to it every time, and it would take me out of the book.
But see, it took me out of the book this time.
But everything was like American English.
But it made me wonder what it was in the UK. I don't know. Words are weird.
Words are weird.
Translations are weird. The differences between American English and British English is weird. Words are weird. That's all.
All right.
The whiskey one is weird because we have both types of whiskey. Why would you? Presumably you can get both types in America, can you?
Yeah, but I think that in the US it's generally spelled with an E, like that's just the standard version.
Even Scotch.
I think if you're talking specifically about Scotch whiskey, you don't have it, but if you're talking about whiskey in general, if you don't specify what kind of whiskey, you usually have the E. So
I think it's also blonde, the only gendered adjective in our language. And a lot of people just ignore it, even though it's technically correct.
Yeah, you know what? I remember learning this one because I, at one point, thought that BLONDE was just the British English way of spelling it. And then I realised that it's blonde if it's male. If you're talking about a man without the E, it's blonde without the E. And if you're talking about a woman, you put the E on. But because men were almost never described as blondes, I'd only ever seen it spelled as the E, with the E. So that's how I thought it was spelled. And then I was like, oh, yeah. But in American English, there's no E regardless, right?
I believe it's the same. There's an E if it's describing a woman. Just a lot of people don't know that or don't follow it, even if they do. Fiancé is the same as well. So I guess we have two gendered words.
Yes.
Kat, thank you so much for coming on. Before we let you get back to your evening, because it's quite late there, getting quite late, would you please tell our listeners where you can be found on the internet, your socials, your latest podcasts?
I am probably most easily found on the social media site formerly known as Twitter, still known as Twitter by most people, as Chronicle Flask, because that was the name of my blog. It still exists, and I've just stuck with the name because now everyone knows that's my name. Also on Blue Sky as the same name. I work at Pseudopod, the horror podcast. So if you want to hear me rabbiting on more, you can listen to our episodes. You should do that anyway, because they're amazing. I'm often hosting there, sometimes narrating. And that's the main thing from me, really. I kind of just run out of hours in the day, really, for very much else. So I have occasionally a story. I force a story out of myself that appears somewhere, but it's like one a year. I'm dreadful at like getting them written and then submitting them. So I'm just really bad at doing that. So I'm afraid I haven't got a book out or anything like that. But do listen to Pseudopod because it's amazing.
Fantastic. Well, thank you again so much for joining us. This has been a fantastic conversation.
Yeah. Great. Thank you very much for having me. It's been great. I will happily come along and talk about Discworld all day until so thank you very much for letting me do that.
Anytime.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Fiction Fans.
Come disagree with us. We are on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at FictionFansPod. You can also email us at fictionfanspod@gmail.com.
If you enjoyed the episode, please rate and review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and follow us wherever your podcasts live.
We also have a Patreon where you can support us and find our show notes and a lot of other nonsense.
Thanks again for listening, and may your villains always be defeated.
Bye!